Risk management is an important part of all our lives. We are exposed to risk daily at work and in our private lives, and often manage it subconsciously. We need to make sure that we think about it actively in the way we deliver our business. Risk to BT can take various forms. It's not just risks that can cause injury. There can be financial risk, risks to projects, risks to services we deliver, risks to the public, risks from missed opportunities, and risks to our reputation. They can affect our performance and our customers, so it's important to understand how these risks can be managed. Doing this properly is central to our success, both in meeting objectives and targets, but also in creating confidence in our customers. This video outlines how to identify, assess and review and report on risks in the workplace and your role and responsibilities as a manager. What we're trying to achieve is a commitment to embedding the principles of effective risk management in the culture of BT. To do this, it needs to become a living process, not a tick-in-the-box exercise. Creating a culture of risk awareness is key to our success, so taking time to accurately identify and record the risks involved in the workplace is an essential part of risk assessment. Risk is something which may have an impact on the individual, the work group or the company as a whole. The risk is then assessed in terms of how likely they are and the severity of the consequences if they occur. When more people are involved, the likelihood is increased. So by performing a risk assessment, we can create a score that provides us with a risk rating. The higher the figure, the higher the risk. Generally, but not exclusively, any risk above 60 will need to be considered further. And you can use the scores to prioritise which activities or tasks you need to look at first.
My name's Ian Mackay. I'm a safety consultant for Accenture HR Services. My background predominantly was in heavy industry. I then went into local government working for a county council, and I've currently been in this role working for BT for about 4.5 years. Risk assessment for me is part of everyday life. We all cross a road sometime or another. We all drive to work, or some of us drive to work. We catch public transport. We're always assessing risk, subconsciously or consciously. And if we do it in our private lives, it makes even more sense to do it in our working lives, because obviously we want to be safe at work so we can enjoy our private lives. As a manager, my responsibilities are quite clear. I'm responsible for the health and safety for my staff. That's a legal requirement, and a way in which I can meet that is by carrying out risk assessments and involving my staff in risk assessments, because they're the people that are living with the hazards day in, day out. They sometimes know better than I do. But if any hazards, any risks are identified to me, then obviously I should do something about it. If I can't do anything about it, it's still a management responsibility, and that's where I should pass it up the management chain. BT has done a tremendous amount of work in compiling generic risk assessments. And what I would do, I would look at those generic risk assessments first of all. I would access those through the Health and Safety Handbook and the ISIS documents, and identify which of those generic risk assessments were attached to my type of work and the work that I was responsible for. If I then need to go out, I'm requested to do local risk assessments, that would be my starting point, the generic one, because that highlights the main hazards attached to that task.
My name is Nigel Bromley. I'm a Senior Health and Safety Consultant, and I'm a chartered member of the Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. The trigger of a local risk assessment which the line manager can carry out is when the individual who's actually carrying out the work thinks that, hang on a minute, there's something here that I can actually manage the risk to. They would actually then default to the line manager to consider carrying out a local risk assessment. But that isn't something that is the absolute norm, because the individuals with the training and experience can actually carry out on-site risk assessments all the time, which basically is just thinking about what they're doing and trying to protect themselves and other people from risks.
A hazard basically is anything with the potential to cause harm, and it can take the form of equipment, it can be a person, and it may well be a process, it may well be a substance. Hazards aren't always obvious, they may not always be visible, but you as a manager will have built up a big skill base during your time working, and you will recognise most of them. If, however, there is something that you're uncertain about, that's where myself or my colleagues may come in, or the safety people within BT, where you can bring those in to help with a local risk assessment.
Loads of help out there. First recourse is search on the BT intranet under risk assessment. There's loads of guidance and documentation to actually help you there. If then you sort of need extra help and guidance, you can involve safety reps. Safety reps are there to help line managers and the individuals. You could speak to your line of business safety champion, your line manager even. Your line manager should be helping you all the time with your actual work. Speak to your line manager. And you've also got recourse to safety specialists such as myself. So if you think about it, there's a heck of a lot of information out there and support and guidance for you. So whatever you think, you're not on your own.
A local risk assessment would involve, first of all, having a look at the generic risk assessment and seeing what extra hazards, identifying extra hazards on that site or that location, that environment, and how that differs to the generic. When you first look at a risk assessment and you're needing to identify the people who are affected by the hazards and the potential risk, the people that you're looking at can be wide ranging. You could be affected by members of public because they can be inquisitive and cause hazards themselves. It may well be the BT employee, and there may be certain categories within that as well, because you could have young workers, you may have an apprentice, so obviously that brings on other hazards as well, because they're not as experienced and they're not as knowledgeable and they need a greater line of supervision. You could have pregnant workers, you could have people with disabilities, you may have someone on a return to work who has been staged back in through the Occupational Health Service to come back, who for example may have had a bad back, and you need to take extra consideration of that individual. You could be identifying contractors on site who are bringing in their own hazards, and it's important that you are furnished with the information that anything they're bringing into your environment, how is that going to affect your staff? Communication isn't always great, and sometimes they just turn up on site and start working. It's important, particularly for managers within an office environment, wherever they've got any contractors come into that a clear defined set of rules is followed and the area is cordoned off. Even better, get them to return out of hours and do that when no one's around. So then you go and you look at your things like your environment, your tools. It may well be the weather. It could be the terrain. We may be working on the hillside, middle of nowhere. It may well be in a busy city centre where you've got other things going off around you that you're not directly involved with. There may be building work, although you may not be part of that building work. Once you've identified those hazards, you evaluate the risk and then you put sufficient control measures into place so that work can then be safely carried out. A good way to do that is to use the hazard ranking form that is available on the web and as part of BT's risk assessment process. That will give you a starting ground. You then decide on your control measures. As a manager, you would record that, and then, of course, once that's been agreed and those control measures put in place, you would then furnish that to the employee and make them aware of what control measures are to be used with the task that they need to do.
Well, now you've carried out your local risk assessment, you've got to actually think about it. The word says local. Now, is it truly local? Is it just local to that individual, that work site? Or think a little bit about it, because you've covered off that risk. Would you actually covered off the risk if anybody else goes to that work site? Is there other sort of individuals that might go to that work site? So just think about that. Is it local just to yourself and the individual, to that workplace? Or could you actually spread this sort of information out to other sort of managers in the area? And then think a little more broader than that. Can you actually think, is this something that might actually impact on the organisation? And if it is, all you have to do then is actually just send a quick email to the safety champion for that line of business, and let them make the decision. It is something that we might want to incorporate into sort of training or policies for the future. It's just basically thinking a bit broader, that's all.
More and more we're getting asked to provide method statements and risk assessments for the work we carry out on customers' premises. which is a good way of providing information to that customer of the activities that we're carrying out and any risks that may arise out of our activities. And again, we've got quite a few method statements for different scenarios and different tasks that have already been completed.
As a line manager, what you can do is actually brief all your team to let them know what they're supposed to do when they're working on an unfamiliar site, which is quite clear really. It's just that when the individual reports on the site, they contact the responsible person and tell the responsible person what they're actually going to do, what method they're going to actually carry out the work in, where they're going to work and everything else. And then that means that the people on the site, the employees, the visitors, members of the household are actually protected. They understand what risk the person is bringing on site. And the flip side to that is when you contact the responsible person when you first go on site, the responsible person can actually let you know what hazards and risks are on that site so you can be protected as an individual. So everybody wins.
In a nutshell, risk assessment to a manager means identifying the hazards, evaluating the risks and putting control measures in place that will ensure that his staff, equipment and the business can function safely and that we can all come back to work tomorrow to do the same job.
Morally, we should always be assessing the risks to others both at work and at home. But legally, as managers, we have to perform risk assessments within the company. So the consequences of failing to demonstrate that adequate control measures have been put in place can be serious, not just for you, but for the company as a whole. I hope this video has helped you develop a keen awareness of the risks out there. And remember, think safe. Stop, assess, formulate, execute.